Okay. All right, now the next theory we're going to work with is Kenneth Burke and his dramatism. And so this is a very kind of core one that's really useful for doing analysis of communication. So let me introduce you to Burke a little bit and make sure you understand a little bit who Kenneth Burke is. Now, did we talk about Burke under rhetoric? Does anybody remember? This is the guy, to see if we remember this. This is a guy who lived in Greenwich Village for a while, and then he was a faculty member in a bunch of different schools, and he ended up living on a farm in New Jersey. No, you don't know that story. Okay. Anyway, this is Kenneth Burke. Kenneth Burke is a person who studies communication and is concerned that people get taken in too easily by what they read. A lot of good smells going on there, right? So Kenneth Burke wants to get people to do careful thinking about the communication that they hear. Now, Kenneth Burke himself was a very brilliant man who couldn't fit in anywhere very well. So he went to school for a while. He dropped out of college. He wrote. He lived in Greenwich Village for a number of years. This was like in the Depression, the 1930s. And then he ended up teaching, as a visiting scholar at different universities. And he often went, and he had some property out in New Jersey, out in West Jersey. He had a farm, and it was kind of a rural, rustic farm. It didn't have electricity, didn't have running water in it. He just kind of kept it very primitive. And so he lived out there. But he did a lot of writing. He did a lot of writing and became very famous for his way of analyzing what's going on in communication. And so Burke, here's some things that Burke said. You can find these anywhere if you look up Kenneth Burke in Wikipedia or online. So you don't have to write it all down, but just listen to it. Kenneth Burke said this about human beings. Now, Walter Fisher said that human beings are people are let me just check this thing, make sure that we're going, so you can get it on the, if you look it up. Yeah, we're going. Walter Fisher said that humans basically are storytellers, right? So that's what he thinks. The scientific model says that humans are logical beings. Now, Kenneth Burke says humans are basically symbol creators. They create symbols, signs, and begin to use those signs to organize their lives. So see, this is the way theorists go. Everybody's got their own emphasis. Everybody's got their own take on things. So Kenneth Burke said this: mankind, human beings, are the symbol-using, symbol-making, symbol-misusing animal. All right, so he sees us as connected, that we're just physical beings who make up these symbols and signs, and then we organize ourselves around them. So it could be words, it could be flags, it could be ideas, like a nation or something, that we make up the idea and then we organize ourselves around it. And he says we are the symbol using, we make them and we misuse them. He said this, that we are separated from our natural condition by instruments of our own making. Now, let's think about that for a minute. We're separated from our own natural condition by instruments of our own making. So what could that mean? What would be our natural condition? What's that?
Like the fourth, nature.
Okay, somehow connected more closely with nature, living. Would people naturally be social or isolated?
Social.
Burke thinks that symbols bring people together. So Burke sees natural state as being more isolated, actually. Yeah, so that's a different take on things here. Our natural condition would be to be isolated. And the symbols then bring people together. And at the same time, that's good that they bring people together. But if the symbols are misused, they damage people. So you bring people together, but then the question is, what is it doing to people the way we bring them together? So for instance, if you bring people together around the idea that they are victims, right? That if we create a symbol, or we create an idea about something, I don't know, let's say Montclair students decide that we're the most mistreated students in the whole colleges in the United States or something. We make a flag, we start giving speeches about it, and we all buy into the idea. So now all of a sudden everyone feels united at Montclair. The things that used to divide us don't divide us anymore because we're all united around this symbol that we are the undergraduates that are the most mistreated. Burke would say that's a way of creating identification through a symbol. That we create a symbol and then we identify ourselves with it, and that brings us into connection with other people. He used a word to describe that. He talks about identification, that we identify with each other around symbols. So if you are connected to the same symbol I'm connected to, then we're connected to each other. So we are united around a symbol. And he would talk about this consubstantial, that we are consubstantial. This is odd language, but this is so if you're going to do Burke analysis, if you're going to write about Burke in doing some description, these are the words you're going to use. You're going to use words like identification, symbols, misusing symbols, consubstantial, that we share in something with someone else, that we are one, at least part of us is one with other people. Does anyone know where that word consubstantial comes from? It's actually a theological word, a word that talks about in Lutheran history. Anybody Lutheran here? Anyway, if you were Lutheran, you'd understand that in the Lutherans' view, in communion, that the body of Christ is consubstantial with the elements, the bread and the wine, that it's in, with, and under the elements. If you're Roman Catholic, what do you believe?
Consecration.
You believe it is transubstantiation, that it is converted into the body and blood of Christ. If you are Reformed or Baptist or something, you believe in more of a symbolic presence. But if you're so Burke uses a lot of theological language. He'll talk about purification, guilt. He'll talk about perfection. He said one of the things Burke says is that we are rotten with perfection. He believes people in their quest to be climbing hierarchies and improving themselves, destroy themselves. This idea of perfection rots us from within. So Burke had a very particular view of people. And his argument was that people are always trying to get rid of guilt. Burke says that at the root of communication is people's desire to be purged of guilt. So this is a little different, right, than some of the other theorists that we've been talking about, right? Walter Fisher, with narrative theory, says, what's at the root of communication? Is that people love to tell stories. So we are storytelling, we think of ourselves in stories. So Burke is after this idea that what we're after is purging ourselves of guilt. And we feel a sense of pollution in his language. And we feel that because of hierarchy. We live where we have created symbols of hierarchy. What does hierarchy mean anyway? If you're part of a hierarchical organization, what does that mean? Anybody? Haley, what does it mean?
Like an order.
An order, a stairway, a climbing up, a higher and lower. So like in most hierarchical organizations, a pyramid organization, the president or the CEO is at the top, and then the managers and the low-level managers, and then the staff, line staff, and then the workers. So there's a hierarchy. And Burke says that we create this. This is not our natural condition. This is not natural. We create it. And then we spend our whole lives feeling bad that we're not at the top of it. And we spend our whole lives trying to get there. You can see this in the fashion industry too, right? With clothes. There's a hierarchy of clothes, right? There's a hierarchy of accessories, with replica watches and knockoff bags and all this stuff. There's a hierarchy, and Burke says none of that is natural. We make it up. These are symbols that we create, we put them on a hierarchy, and then we run like crazy to make it work. And we kill ourselves in the process. So we are polluted. We feel like, I'm only this. That's bad. I need to get up to here. So I'm feeling bad. I feel guilty that I'm not perfect. I feel guilty that I'm not at the top. And so we use our communication to do that. And Burke says that there are two basic ways people do this. One of the ways is we punish ourselves. So again, this is a very theological kind of thing, but Burke was not a religious person, but he used theological language because it worked for what he wanted to say. So he says one of the things we do if we are not is we put ourselves down. He called that self-mortification. We put ourselves down. And for Burke, he's looking at this and he's saying, this is nuts. This is not our natural condition anyway. So why is this person spending their life punishing themselves for not attaining something that is just a misuse of symbols?
Well, how is it not exactly natural when you have something survival of the fittest, where the stronger person is going to dominate over the weaker? Isn't it kind of the same thing? You have someone who has more money as opposed to someone who has less.
I don't know. I had to look at that. I think he thinks we set up all kinds of hierarchies, though.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that
maybe there's a natural hierarchy.
Because you have that stronger person, so they're going to be the leader. They're going to reap more. Like I guess even in ancient times they would have more food or whatever than people. That's
an interesting thought. I wonder if Burke would say, though, the natural condition of people is to be isolated, so that wouldn't kick in because they wouldn't be in relationship with anybody else. So, but it's a good point, yeah. So are there natural hierarchies that we didn't create that just exist?
Well, I mean, like in a democracy, wouldn't there be that no matter what? Like unless we're living in communism?
Well, there would be.
Because I mean, like since everyone has their own, everyone can reach, some people can become a doctor, some people are going to do other jobs, drive the shuttle bus in Montclair. I mean, there's just different, I'm just saying there's just different levels of what you're going to do. And then, if you want to all be equal, then I guess we should all live in a communist community.
Well, yeah, and Burke lived in a time in the 1930s in Greenwich Village when they liked the communist ideal, but were turned off by the brutality of Lenin and the way it was working out. So yeah, you're right. You're tuning into his view that people should be more equal. Even if they did different jobs, they wouldn't think of it as a hierarchy. They'd think the bus shuttle driver is just as important to society as the doctor is just as important. So we're not feeling guilty or polluted or punishing ourselves.
Doesn't level of pay though show what's like more, obviously more, I don't know.
Except
Everyone should get paid the same as
in the
well.
ideal communist system, that doesn't work that way. You get what you need and you give what you can. So, yeah, so that would be the ideal anyway.
Same with education.
What's
That's a
that?
hierarchy that we've made.
Yeah, right. I've got to get my bachelor's, I got to get my master's, I get my doctorate.
There's some
Yeah.
people that will never get their doctorate. And
Right.
they've just had to settle into understanding that that's as high on that hierarchy scale as you're going to get.
And Burke would say, this is artificial. And if you spend your life then feeling bad or blaming others, see, that's the other thing Burke says, is if we're somewhere in this hierarchy and we're not getting anywhere, we punish ourselves or we blame others, and we look for a scapegoat.
Okay.
So Burke is saying that to deal with our guilt, we look for a scapegoat. We look for somebody or something to blame for why we're not, where we should be in the hierarchy.
Is that number 2?
Yeah, that's a victimage. Yeah, go ahead.
When he says isolated, does he mean like people just roam the earth, like not interacting at all?
Well, I don't know that it ever
Like-
existed, yeah.
I'm just saying, like, what does he mean by isolated though? Like, because that's kind of extreme, like in order to, procreate and
Right, right.
communication to survive. And,
Yeah. I don't, Burke probably would say that even in our natural condition, we would begin to use signs to come together. So it might be words, or it might be a common area. I mean, he looks probably at primitive societies and says totem poles are a symbol around which people gathered and found unity. So I don't know exactly how to say that, but he's concerned to see that people get on a rat race or a treadmill to get somewhere that really has only been created by human beings to begin with. And I mean, we see it like with all this stuff that's going on with the Kurds and the Turks. How did they get into this? Is this the natural condition of things? No, it's not. We've imposed borders, national borders on it that we made up, and it's led to fighting.
In a way, aren't hierarchies supposed to motivate people?
Yes.
Because it's used to, you want to get to that.
I want to earn enough to buy that thing. I want to have that home. I want to go on that vacation. Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, if everyone was just equal, if you weren't going anywhere, you might just feel like, well, why am I doing this?
Well, that's a whole other question about whether people can be motivated by things other than hierarchies. So that's another question. I mean, that was the original, again, you talk about different forms of society. That was part of the original view of Marx and others, that people would be motivated by the ability, the desire to contribute to the well-being of the community. And that would motivate them. Adam Smith doesn't agree. He thinks that so there's a lot of political economic theory. But anyway, if you're going to do Burke's analysis, you look for ways that people punish themselves, or you look for ways that people blame others and for their problems. The reason we're not yet good is that we have been hampered by somebody or something. Well, I don't have enough money because I can't get the right job because this manager doesn't like me, or we find things to blame for it. And he uses the word redemption. He says we get out of this redemption when we either stop and rest, so we stop running the hierarchy. So we just say, it's okay for me to be where I am and to be who I am. I don't need those clothes, I don't need those knockoffs, I don't need this thing. We just stop. That's redemption from this spirit of hierarchy. Or we have what he calls a symbolic rebirth. And that means we exchange the symbols that we're organizing our lives by for some other symbols. So we change our symbol system. So maybe we identify with some new symbols that don't do this to us. So we stop accepting these symbols and we take on new symbols that allow us to feel different about our condition. All right.
Example,
Of that. What?
example.
You want an example of that? Well, I was watching a show on New Mexico prisons the other day, and there's a guy on death row there who had a religious conversion. So he was viewing himself one way and feeling a certain way about himself. And then he had a religious conversion in the prison system, and that changed the way.
So he found God?
Right. And that was a symbolic, in Burke's terms, that became a symbolic rebirth because it was a change of symbol systems. So the things that were, the hierarchies and the things all shifted for him at that point. This also works in any of the marginalized groups. You know, when you have a marginalized group that feels like they're down at the bottom of the hierarchy, you know, and they feel bad, and then they change their symbol system to say, well, we have, you know, pride in this, or this is, we change our system, and now all of a sudden we're at the top of a hierarchy. Nothing changed except that we changed the symbols.
I saw that one, but it's hard to, what, another one?
Well, it happened for African Americans in the Black Pride movement, right? And there was a hierarchy
Right.
in which African Americans were located somewhere. Well, then we began to change symbols. We began to say black is beautiful. We began to talk about black power. We began to organize ourselves around different symbols. We had our own stores. You know, so we changed the symbol system and had a rebirth from it. Didn't change necessarily the thing, but eventually it changes the other hierarchy. So.
Well, in a pretend system, okay? Like say you were a Yankee fan, okay?
Mhm.
Now you're at the bottom of the barrel. Well, you could all of a sudden become a Boston fan and start wearing the hat and getting into that.
Right, that could be one, that's one way out of your pollution and guilt, Burke would say.
Okay.
Another way is to change your system to say, all right, what's important is not winning, but endurance and perseverance and sticking to it and not giving up. So now we've changed our symbols from winning is at the top to sticking it out is at the top. And all of a sudden now we rise to the top. Nothing changed except the symbols we're using and the hierarchies we're using. This probably happened for you know, again, we've used punk early on too. If you just sidestep the existing hierarchy and you create a new one, you could be at the top of it. Right. So Burke looks for ways that people use new symbols in order to purge themselves of guilt and pollution, or in the worst case, that they just scapegoat others. To say, the reason we can't attain perfection is because of the existence of these others. So you know, there's a little bit of that. I mean, Burke would see that in the war on terror. The reason that our world is not perfected is because these people. So if we get rid of these people, then everything will be better. So you have hierarchies, guilt, and purging of it. All right, any quick thoughts about this? So this is kind of an introduction to basic Burke ideas. So if you were going to do a Burke analysis of something, this is some of the language you might use. You would look for statements of frustration about not being able to attain things. And Burke would say, don't buy into that guilt and pollution. Have a symbolic rebirth. Put something else into your hierarchies. Have a different hierarchy that you're living under, that you're working with. But people love to climb hierarchies. He would say, this has happened if you ever went to a club, right? If you ever joined a sorority or you joined a club, all of a sudden you had a new hierarchy, right? And so there are new certifications to get, there are new levels of the organization you can get in, and people want to climb up the ladders. And Burke challenges the question that that's a good idea. But you can disagree with Burke. That's right. This is just understanding who he is. Now, Burke said if we're trying to figure out what people are doing, what the motives are that are driving people, or how they're thinking about their hierarchies and what they're doing in life, you can use a set of words to figure it out. And he called this his dramatistic pentad. Okay, so Burke's pentad, or 5 things that Burke looks for. And these are not original with Burke, but he uses them a great deal. So Burke says this: we want to ask the question, in this speech, or in this image, or in this symbol, or whatever it is, we're going to look for 5 things. We're going to look for the act. We're going to look for the agent. We're going to look for the agency. We're going to look for the scene. And we're going to look for the purpose. We're going to look for these 5 things in anything: a symbol, a speech, a picture, a movie, someone's talk. And when we pick these out, we're going to find that some of these are more evident than others. So that in any given speech or any given article, there's more of one and less of another. And so Burke said you will have ratios of these things. So for instance, a given article, or a given, we're going to do news articles, might have a lot to do with act and agency. So this is a ratio. Burke says, all right, he says, I read something and it was all about what was done and what it was done with. That was what was highlighted in there. So let's take a school shooting, for instance. Well, that's probably a bad example for us. Yeah. Let's take a street shooting out in a difficult area somewhere. Now, some news articles will focus on a shooting took place, a murder took place with a gun. Okay. Burke would say that's an act-agency ratio. And that tells you that the person who's writing this, or the person who's talking about this, views the world in a certain way. And they view the world in terms of that things lead to actions. That actions are dependent on things that are available to people. So Burke would say, I can now tell you about this person, and now their motives will be to control things so that certain actions don't take place. So Burke will read motives off of the ratio of these things to each other. All right, so we'll do some other examples. So for instance, it could also be You could also get an article about the same event that would be a scene agent article. That it took place in the inner city by a young person. Okay, so if that is what is highlighted in the article, Burke will say, now I will tell you, now I can read off the motives of the person. I can tell you something about this person, the way they view the world, and the way they think things need to be fixed. In this view,